I was walking up the East Coast Sea, I saw a big city there in front of me. So many lights sent a shiver up my spine, that sure had a pretty skyline. Hey friend, what's that town called? New York City.
Good day, everybody. This is Gary Fielder from Denver, Colorado. I'm sorry I haven't updated everybody on our situation involving the Dominion class action. I think our last video was on November 18th or so of 2021. And at that time, although we had filed our opening brief, and I think the respondents, the defendants in the case, had filed their response brief, we were still waiting on the magistrate's order with regard to the sanctions imposed on the plaintiff's attorneys, including myself, of course. And we were still to file our reply brief in the substantive appeal concerning the dismissal of the case for lack of standing. So, right after we made our last video, I would say maybe 4 or 5 days, I think it was November 22nd, the magistrate issued the order sanctioning myself and co-counsel Ernie Walker for like $187,000 in the attorney's fees of Dominion Voting Systems, Inc., Center for Tech and Civic Life, who we call CTCL, Facebook, Inc., who I guess now is Meta something or something. I'll just continue to call them Facebook. And the attorney's fees for the Attorney General of Pennsylvania and the Attorney General of Michigan. And so, needless to say, both Ernie and I were just devastated by that. We're in the middle of the appeal. Our reply brief is due, and sure enough, the judge finally issues the sanction itself. And so we refiled a new notice of appeal with regard to the frivolous end. I mean, the whole sanction's based upon this concept that Mr. Walker and I are frivolous in filing the lawsuit. We should have known that none of our plaintiffs have standing to bring these claims, all of which is, again, on appeal and what we disagree with. But that's the nature of the sanction, and that's what we'll be discussing. But yes, calling us frivolous lawyers. So we get this order, and we're preparing our new notice of appeal, essentially, just to start the appeal all over again. We filed the earlier notice of appeal just to make sure we didn't miss anything, because he had granted the sanctions, he just didn't grant the amount. So we filed the first notice of appeal in an abundance of caution, but later found out that you really do need to wait until the sanctions order is imposed. The amount of the sanction is imposed before the time started to run on the notice of appeal. So we filed our new notice of appeal, and about a week after the magistrate's order, on November 30th, my dad died in a car accident in Copperas Cove, Texas. And my dad was a major figure in my life, as I'm sure everybody's can identify with that in some way. My dad went to the University of Texas, played football under Darrell Royal. In fact, you can look him up. He's in the official roster, 1959, James Roger Fielder. But my older brother was born in 1959, and my dad always said one day he was a football star at the University of Texas, and the next day he had 3 jobs. So his life kind of changed a little bit, and he doesn't really talk about it much, quite frankly, but I have a bunch of old pictures. Maybe I'll share those during our next podcast or so. But he was a magnanimous person, and so that kind of set me back a little bit. And so right after Christmas, we had his memorial. I flew down to Texas, and there was a lot of people there. Relatives were all there, and we had a good memorial and a good little party after that, and that sort of all led to the closure of that chapter in, of course, my dad's life and in my relationship with him in that regard. So shortly thereafter, within just a couple of weeks after that, in the middle of January, I was diagnosed with skin cancer. Not that big of a deal, but I did have a big chunk of my neck taken out on February 8th, and then another big chunk on my shoulder here taken out on February 16th. So that caused us a little bit of delay in trying to get our next video out to update everybody. So finally, my staff said, "You've got to get a video out." And I just kept saying, "I can't do it. I don't want to do it. I don't want to talk about it." So because it's been a rough couple of months. And although we're tough in our exterior, all of this attack on us has been really tough. It's been tough on my family. It's been tough on me. But we're soldiering through, and we're not about to quit because we still feel righteous in our approach, and we're going to get into that a little bit today. In the sanctions motion, in the order equating the sanctions, the magistrate said things like, we should take responsibility, we defamed the defendants, like I'm a criminal defendant or something that needs to take responsibility for my crime. The punishment will be less. They should have known it was frivolous. And so it's just really been daunting to think that we thought about this. We've described our strategy dozens of times on these videos, but to replay it again, thinking that there may be some who are watching this now podcast, we're going to talk about that as well, and not even know that we filed a lawsuit on December 22nd of 2020, now over 15 months ago, asserting that really the people have standing. The people who are registered to vote have standing. Maybe not to sue a sovereign state to force that state to send certain electors to Washington, D.C. We've said that dozens of times throughout our videos, if not hundreds of times. But if there are private side actors like Dominion Voting Systems, Inc., Facebook, CTCL, Mark Zuckerberg, those are private side actors who turn themselves into state actors, transform themselves into state actors through their involvement in an election, much less a national election for president, well then the Constitution applies to those private entities. So who would be able to bring the lawsuit against those entities? Who's really been damaged? A particular candidate? No, the people. We, the people, are the vested ones. Another comment that the magistrate said was that this wasn't a plaintiff-driven lawsuit, that this was a creation in the minds of the attorneys, which we vehemently disagree with. When you go to a lawyer because you've been hurt, then you expect the lawyer to bring his or her expertise to the fore and articulate the complaint. Everybody felt harmed, at least tens of millions of people felt harmed by the 2020 election. And they all articulate those harms in different ways. Some, of course, ironically, who voted for the winning candidate may not feel harmed. And those are the ones that send me hate mail and leave nasty messages about me on the internet and things like that. They don't feel harmed. Well, their candidate won. But any objective person, any person who's vested in the system and its integrity, we talk about voter integrity, election integrity. Well, if the system has no integrity, that's a damage. And it could just be your subjective thought. It could just be your subjective feeling. But if tens of millions of people share that feeling, and I think the Rasmussen poll said that 56, I think maybe not 59 now, feel that some fraud occurred in the 2020 election, well, that's a high number. Well, that's a sense that voters get. Now, maybe you have that sense and you're a foreigner. No negative comments about foreigners. Maybe you're not registered to vote. Maybe you're too young to vote. Maybe you don't really care, but you feel like, well, that system isn't very fair. Well, you don't have standing. But if you're vested in the system, you have a birth certificate, you have a driver's license, you have a Social Security card, you pay your taxes, you do all those things, you're registered to vote, you get a jury summons, well, you're vested. And when the system that you're vested in disenfranchises you, or no one has any confidence in you, how can you say that's not a damage? How can you say you haven't been injured in fact? The example I give is the prisoner in a private prison. The case law is very clear that to run a prison means that you're involved in state action. So when a state privatizes a prison function, that's privatizing a state action. Now, when you privatize the ice skating rink down in the public park, that's not really state action because the state's not required to set up and run an ice rink. But the only reason we as the people created states is to run an election. That's their really only function. But if after that election, the state legislature creates or the state constitution creates a judicial system and people get arrested and they go to prisons, well, that's another state function. So if you're an inmate in that prison and your constitutional rights are being violated, you have standing. Now, maybe that prisoner's sister is upset about how her brother's being treated in the prison. Well, she doesn't have standing because she's not suffering the loss. She's not vested. She's not a prisoner. Well, if we're the registered voter, we're the prisoner. We're in the system. If you're not a registered voter, you're like the sister. You're looking at a system that you could criticize, but you really don't have standing to say anything about it. The case was completely plaintiff-driven. There were 8 plaintiffs from 5 states. They all filled out an under oath affidavit. By the time we filed the amended complaint, the facts of which have all been proven true now, which was approximately March 12th in that area, March 15th in that area, there were 160 plaintiffs from 38 states. And then right before we got the case dismissed, I think it was around April 26th, we had prepared and were ready to file our motion to join 350 more plaintiffs, all of whom had filled out an under oath affidavit and attached a copy of their passport or driver's license, every one of which we checked out in terms of the authentication of the driver's license and whether that person was really registered to vote and whether even the notary was an actual notary. Every affidavit we went over because we wanted to know that before we filed on behalf of a person, that person was a real person, not just someone on the other end of an email or a telephone or even an in-person conference. We double-checked everything. We were ready to file an additional 350 plaintiffs from 49 states before the case got dismissed, and then at that point, we were in the appellate process. So the case is entirely plaintiff-driven. It's just that the lawyers come up with the legal theories. Our legal theory is that this is a civil rights case. This isn't necessarily a voting rights case, although it impacts your voting rights. It's a First Amendment case, freedom of expression. It's a due process case. Substantive due process is process engaged in by the state that shocks the consciousness of a reasonable person. Now, that's a relatively high standard, but I think when we get into how CTCL influenced local elections, which at the national level are national elections all over the country, the impact that Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook and Priscilla Chan had through their connection with CTCL and their connection through censorship into Facebook, which would ordinarily be on the private side, but because they were interacting with elections that became state action, well then they're liable as well. And sort of separately, as I've said dozens of times, Dominion Voting Systems Inc. over and to the side, we call them Dominion, they're over to the side. I can't say that they were in conspiracy with these other actors, but over to the side is Dominion with the legal theory that their systems just don't work, that they violate due process, that they're easily hackable, that clearly vote switching, vote fractionalization, deleting votes, adding votes, just the process of adjudicating the votes, whether it's the computer adjudicating a vote or a live person of whom you're not aware is adjudicating the votes. Those types of systems through law review articles, state reports, the state of Texas report, other independent researchers, other experts, all of whom, not all of whom, but many of whom we've researched, and their reports are part of our complaint. So that the magistrate kept complaining about us not retaining our own experts. First, we're just in the pleading stage, but second, why would we need to retain them? They're plentiful. They're all over the place. Now, we pick and choose. We try not to listen to everything that anybody says, but the individuals who filed under oath affidavits in other federal courts, those reports have been used and adopted in the factual allegations contained in our original complaint and in our amended complaint. So it was backed by expert testimony. It was backed by other states and their reports, law review articles, and the damage was to the people. So we focused on the people. We've said this dozens of times. Everybody has to play their part if you're vested in the system. I hear a lot about wanting arrest. I hear a lot about, well, that violated 20 laws in the state of Arizona. I hear about treason or whatever. How about a $1 judgment to a probability in a civil rights case? That'll have the same effect. You don't have to arrest the governor. You don't have to arrest the Secretary of State. It doesn't matter if they violated laws. The supreme law is the Constitution. If you are a state actor, you must give people their due process. You cannot infringe upon someone's right to assemble or right to express themselves, their freedom of speech, their vote. So if you're a Secretary of State and you violated someone's civil rights and the jury awards that person $1, that person's not going to be the Secretary of State anymore. That's the bottom line. Now, if you violated the rights of tens of millions of people and each one of them won $1, well, that's tens of millions of dollars that that person and many others would owe. And that's the whole point about our class action lawsuit against a number of different defendants, because a lot of people were affected. Their constitutional rights were violated. We think $1 does not reflect the damage, but we've suggested $1,000. Well, that doesn't even get close to the damage that people have suffered. Your right to vote for president is worth $1,000 measly dollars. That's all it's worth. However, if there are tens of millions of you, all of whom have a case, well, that's billions of dollars in judgments. And so in that regard, why does anyone need to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt to try to stick someone in jail? Why does anyone wait for an attorney general to act? We have been very careful in our public approach. I'm not on the Steve Bannon show. I'm not on the Alex Jones show. I'm not on the Tucker Carlson show. I'm not on ABC or CBS or NBC. We're not really on Facebook. We communicate on Telegram between ourselves, but we don't really have a Telegram channel that we put content out. We make our videos, we put them on Rumble and YouTube and other outlets, but we really don't try to publicize them or use advertising. We don't use advertising, do we? Our YouTube videos don't have those annoying advertisements, skip ad, do we?
No.
Good, okay, good, yeah. We don't do any of that. We communicate with the people through email and these videos and through phone calls and other letters. And we're trying to do it in the most grassroots way that we can. I don't see Durham on the Steve Bannon show. I don't see Durham on the Alex Jones show. I don't see Durham on the Tucker Carlson show. I don't see Durham on ABC. I don't see Durham on CBS. I don't see Durham on NBC. So what makes Durham better than me? He's counsel for the government. I have my law license. I went to law school. I went to the University of Texas at Austin. I've been working on this for over 30 years. I've read all the books. I've conducted over 450 jury trials. I've picked thousands of jurors, all of whom are registered voters. Many of those have been in the state of Colorado, but that's a pretty good cross-section of people. I know how people feel. I can read articles. I can watch TV. I can talk to people. I know what's going on in this country. To be called frivolous, to be called a frivolous lawyer for filing a civil rights case against these entities when the judge said, I should have known better, that I defamed these people. Well, at least we have enough guts to say the word. Dominion Voting Systems, Inc. I went to a function a couple of weeks ago, and there were multiple speakers. I just sat in the crowd, and they would say, the vendor, or the voting machine company. No one has the guts to say, Dominion Voting Systems, Inc. I don't hear Steve Bannon say, Dominion Voting Systems, Inc. I don't think Alex Jones has ever uttered the word, Dominion Voting Systems, Inc. Say the word. Say the company. They're state actors. I haven't heard Roger Stone talk about state action. I haven't heard Tucker Carlson say the word state action. I haven't heard any of these commentators talk about state action. I've heard Professor Dershowitz talk about state action, and I've seen his class action lawsuit that he filed against Dominion Voting Systems, Inc., but I don't see those lawyers being found frivolous. I don't see those lawyers having to pay $190,000 in somebody else's attorney's fees. But because it's little old Gary Fielder and Ernie Walker, because we're not famous, because we don't come from a big law firm, oh, we're frivolous now. So, yeah, we've been going through a lot. We've been putting up with this barrage of intimidation and threats for over a year now. And we've managed to get this far. And if it was so frivolous, you'd think that it would have been dismissed and the appeal just would have been drafted up and this is obviously frivolous. Well, we haven't set for oral arguments. We may not get oral arguments. Any day now, the 10th Circuit is going to issue an order. And if that 10th Circuit comes out and says, no, I'm sorry, you don't have any right to file a class action lawsuit, even against these private entities. If the 10th Circuit comes out and says, oh no, Dominion Voting System isn't a state actor. Oh no, you can't sue Facebook. They've got immunity. Well, we challenge that in court. We challenge that on a constitutional basis in our original and amended complaint. So, yeah, we've been blackballed. Nobody talks about the real entities, and nobody mentions us because no one has the guts to. Now, on the other hand, we're not grandstanding, and that's another reason. Once we got the case dismissed, what are we supposed to do? Out there running commercials on a class action lawsuit that's been dismissed, out of which the lawyers have been found to be frivolous? So no, we're not on Telegram. We're not on other social media sites promoting. We're not really on Gab. I mean, I think we have really a site, but we don't really promote it. We just put out our videos. We file all our pleadings. All of our pleadings are filed in honor. If you look at the pleadings, you'll notice how well crafted they are. We make typo mistakes every now and then, but you'll notice the page breaks are always at a paragraph, and we keep the mistakes to a minimum because we work hard on all our pleadings. And although every now and then we request an extension, it's always for good cause. It's never for dilatory purposes. So all of this is coming to a head. And of course, the 10th Circuit could go off into a direction and, well, we missed this, or you didn't technically do this, and avoid the topic altogether. Courts are good at that. But they're going to have to issue an order. They're going to have to issue an order. And our opening brief with regard to whether or not we're frivolous is due on March 18th. I'm not quite sure. I may file a motion to stay that. It seems like we ought to get the original decision back to whether we have standing or not before we even get into this frivolous issue. But we're ready to file that opening brief, and we've got about 3 weeks to do it. So once we file that opening brief, well, then the 10th Circuit is going to have their hands full. Because I just don't see that they're going to come back and say that voters don't have a right to file a 1983 action against these obvious state actors. But we'll have to see, because whatever they say, if they rule on our behalf, I anticipate that the defendants will take it to the Supreme Court. And if they rule against us, well, goodness willing, we'll get our petition for writ of certiorari filed in the United States Supreme Court. And we'll make our argument there that, of course, the people have a right to bring a class action. Of course, the people have a right. And those other individuals over there, those other artificial persons in terms of the corporations and companies, and individual persons over there in the embodiment of a human being, but they're violating people's rights, well, those are the defendants. And although they're not sovereign states, they're state actors engaged in state action. So that's what the case is all about. So, however you view it, it's going to be a magnanimous and very important decision. I'm waiting for the class action civil rights case against Moderna. Well, they've got immunity. You can't sue them because they've got immunity. Not to violate our civil rights, they don't. I caught COVID. I got COVID, and now we're being informed that the whole virus is just some sort of manufactured, whatever, what do they call it? The gene sequencing is sort of artificial, synthetic, that's what they call it, yeah. Synthetic virus. Well, I caught that. I'm a victim. Where's the civil rights case against Moderna? Well, apparently the 10th Circuit may say that, the victims don't really have it right. Or they might say, well, if your rights are violated and the company is engaged in state action, and wouldn't you see that all these pharmaceutical companies are in bed with the states and the nations and the governments of the world? I would call that state action. Certainly these mandates are requiring that we use their products. So if they're violating our civil rights by getting everybody sick on a synthetic virus, wouldn't you say that that somehow violated your rights? Wouldn't that shock the consciousness of the people? So yeah, this case, O'Rourke v. Dominion Voting Systems, Inc. is a big deal. And we're not frivolous. And I guess if they just find us frivolous throughout, and they impose this huge judgment on us, and we lose our law licenses, and we get disbarred, and we have to make a living some other way, then I guess that's the way it's going to have to go. Because that's where we're at. And in the meantime, since the first video and this video, just look how much has happened. The whole trucker situation, which I would not have anticipated in the middle of November. That's 2.5 months ago. And now there's these convoys all over the world. And of course what they did in Canada was just so bad. And what's happening now with the convoys to Washington, D.C. Even though we couldn't have anticipated that particular circumstance, it was situations like that that we've been talking about from the beginning. That's part of the damage. When you have elections that people question and there's no integrity, well, then what would happen? Well, the people would revolt. There'd be trucker convoys. People would descend on their cities of political power. Thank goodness no one got hurt in the Canadian situation. Can we guarantee that that same level of sort of non-violence and just allowing yourself to be arrested? And I heard there were just truckers running everywhere. I mean, just people just scattering everywhere for their lives. Is that same thing going to happen here? No one can guarantee that. No one can say that things aren't going to get ugly very quickly. That's the reason we filed the lawsuit. The whole reason we filed the lawsuit was to provide a peaceful alternative to what normally happens in a situation like this. It's not just the United States. Anytime a populace feels like they're free and fair elections are being subverted, then they have a tendency to rise up and revolt. That's what populations do. So we have a civil system. We have lawyers. You can come to court. You can file your complaint. You can bring in the people that have standing, that have the injury in fact. And then you can make your claim and lay out your evidence. But no, when you call the lawyers frivolous and you don't let them bring their case, and a bunch of other attorneys, goodness bless them, file cases that don't work and make everybody else look bad, well, that leads to trucker convoys. And that's where we're at. And it leads to other things too. One of the big objections that the magistrate had is what he called inflammatory language, which he alleges was not only in our pleadings, but in these videos, which apparently they all watch to wait for me to say something stupid or criticize them in some unfair way, to defame them. I've never defamed any of them. I've never said really a negative word about the magistrate. I've never really said a negative word about any of the defendants or any of the other lawyers. Everything that we've said are facts, and we back them up with facts. So I'm not into the personal statements made back and forth, but the magistrate accused us of using inflammatory language. He never really identified what that language was, but I'm assuming he's talking about my references to Civil War. And I can make those references all I want. I've been making those references for over a year now. Are we not even closer? I said a year ago we're this close to Civil War. Well, now we're this close. And it hasn't resolved at all. It's getting worse. It's getting worse. And now, do I even have to comment on what's going on in Ukraine? I'm not going to take a side. I'm not going to take Russia's side or Ukraine's side, or what is the side of the United States? What's happening? Well, it's pretty obvious when you just go to any news outlet and it's all war, what's happening. It's pretty obvious what's going on. So, is that going to escalate? What's going to happen when we start getting involved into that? What is going to happen in this country when we start getting involved in that quagmire over there in the Ukraine? Well, is that not foreseeable? Is that not all related back to the election? Are the mandates, if you want a vaccine, take the vaccine. If you don't want the vaccine, don't take the vaccine. But these mandates requiring that a person in the United States take a vaccine, much less these other countries. I can't believe Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and Austria, things like that. It's heartbreaking, but not in the United States. Of course not. We have what? A constitution. The people are the sovereign. You can't tell somebody what to do with their body. You can coin the money, and you can declare war, and you can interact with commerce. I think that's what the truckers are all mad at, because the governments do have control over commerce. Well, they theoretically have control over those that are driving the big trucks in commerce. That's how they're trying to get their nose into the situation. But for the general population, you can't mandate these types of experimental drugs. Well, that all goes back to the election. The whole COVID thing goes back to the election. It all goes back to the election. How are we going to resolve this? Our next election is in 8 months. Now, that's not a national election. You're voting for your United States representative. That's a national post, but it's still within your state. You're voting maybe for a U.S. senator, but that's within your state to send your representative. The next national election is 2 years and 8 months, and that'll be on top of us. So instead of just, my humble advice, instead of just trying to overturn an election and reinstall Trump, which is definitely going to lead to civil war, then why don't we just continue to follow the process? follow a peaceful process. And whatever we do, try to keep it nonviolent. But we are not, the plaintiffs are not, I am not, our staff is not encouraging violence in any way. In fact, the reason we felt so strong about filing it before January 6th is to make the point that it didn't really matter what happened on January 6th. If one side won, the other side was going to be mad. And if the other side won, well, then the other side of that was going to be mad. It was going to wind up being something just like what happened. And you could say, well, that was the FBI influenced that. Well, that's foreseeable too. It's called politics. And anytime you don't have election integrity, well, governments are going to start using provocateurs. Governments are going to start using informants. That's what they've been doing for centuries, if not eons. They're highly sophisticated in their ways. And the only way out of this is to vote our way out of it. And the only way we can vote our way out of it is to have a legitimate voting system. If we had a legitimate voting system, do we all know what would happen in the next 8 months? Do we all know what really would happen? Well, what probably would happen is that we'd probably elect a bunch of Republicans who would go up there and do nothing again. But what would at least happen is real voters would cast real votes. The precincts would count the votes accurately, and the winner would win. And then we would all concede and move on, and we would change everything. So with all due respect, we really don't need President Trump. We just need a voting system that works. And then you can re-elect President Trump in another 2 years and 8 months, which will be like that. But even that won't happen if we don't have a system with integrity. So that's what we're all about. We're not frivolous. We're not violent. We're not very smart. I keep saying, why don't we get help? Where's our cavalry? Where are all these really smart lawyers that could help us out and figure out, do the people have any power or not? Is our power really just to stand outside and protest? Is that all we really have? And if a couple million of us can get together and we can really make some change. Oh, really? Well, they're doing that in countries all over the world, and no one's writing about it. No one's seeing it on the nightly news. None of the governments care. That's our only power, is to amass in millions and hope and have some speakers speak on the stage. That's your only power? You don't have the power to vote because your vote's fractionalized or deleted or changed? You don't have the power to bring a lawsuit with a private attorney general? You don't need Durham. You got private lawyers that they can file the cases on your behalf. Can't do that either? So no, I think we're at a serious crossroads as to where we're going to go. And I'm not provoking violence. I'm a very peaceful person. People that know me as a very, very peaceful person, to the point where I call myself a pacifist. That's what I'm saying. If I have to sacrifice my life, or if I have to sacrifice my law license, or if I have to sacrifice everything I believe in, well, then I guess that's just what I'm going to have to do and others are going to have to do. I don't want my family hurt, obviously, but that's where it's gotten. We're all going to have to make a sacrifice. So I'll just lay in front of the tank. I'll just take the shot. I'll just take the stab. I'll just take the disbarment, whatever it takes to get this job done. I can't pay $187,000 in attorney's fees, but maybe we'll have a fundraiser. Maybe you can give me some help in that regard. But that's years down the line. That's years down the line. Because the 10th Circuit is going to issue an order very soon. And the Supreme Court is going to get involved in this. Now, maybe they don't take the case. Maybe they deny cert. Okay, well, that's not going to end it. That's not going to end it. At some point, we're going to have to reach a conclusion on what happened, how it was done, who did it, and what the results really should have been. And I think it's doable. All of this information is coming out just like we foresaw, that all the ballot boxes were stuffed by these mules who were in a sophisticated cabal that went all around the country. Well, when you put drop box boxes up. Well, you can just reasonably foresee that that's going to happen. So that wasn't a very big guess, but now they have all the evidence. Well, that's part of our case. That's what this case is all about, to establish that those things really happen. Now, if they really did happen, well, the states that were the swing states, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Arizona, Nevada, who did I miss? Wisconsin. They sent their electors to Washington, D.C. There's a big push to decertify the election. Those certifications mean nothing. The states sent their electors to D.C. The electors cast their votes. The president has been chosen. I just don't believe you could impeach the president. You could remove the president to the 25th Amendment. Maybe you could charge the president with treason, if not talking about the president, but if a president is engaged in treason, well, I'm assuming you can arrest that person. And then there's a line of secession. So maybe if the so-called Republicans take over the House in November or next January, well, whoever they elect to the Speaker of the House will be third in line. We'll have to see how it all plays out. But having the Supreme Court come in and say Trump won, it's not going to happen. That's just my humble opinion. So in the meantime, all of those people who are trying to do that, well, more power to them. But at least I had enough guts to look that magistrate right in the eye and say, those certifications are already void. So all of this effort that you're putting into decertifying the certifications are already void. It's called void ab initio. Yeah, fraud vitiates the certification. Well, the fraud already happened. They're already decertified. Now, it may not feel like it, but they are. They're already void. So that's our complaint. That's how we've approached this from the beginning. We've approached it from a unique way. We're not like other lawyers in terms of how they've addressed their cases, and we're not like other parts of this movement who are trying to do things in their way, all of which are good. We're on the civil rights end, class action, monetary damages, the real actors, the real victims. That's what we're all about. So we've got some announcements to make. As I stated, our opening brief is due on the sanctions. We've got a lot of things to say about that, but I've been going on for some time now, and I'll wrap it up. But our pleadings are on our website. If you go to Court Listener, you can review all the pleadings. I think most of the pleadings have been purchased on Pacer by somebody or us or somebody, and so they're free. Go to Court Listener, you can look up O'Rourke v. Dominion Voting Systems, you can follow the pleadings. The briefing is up on the website, dominionclassaction.com. Many months ago, back in late April, May of 2021, a nonprofit was established. I don't really have anything to do with the nonprofit, SOS, Save Our Suffrage, Dominion Class Action. We're sort of doing business as, I say we. The nonprofit that's been established is Save Our Suffrage, SOS, doing business as Dominion Class Action. So when people write us checks, and I say us again, but we're in connection with the nonprofit. We've learned that. That's really how we have to get this thing funded, is to create a nonprofit with a board that's independent of the lawyers, and then they make decisions. They run the website. They take the contributions. If you make a contribution on dominionclassaction.com, that goes to SOS. That goes to Save Our Suffrage. That goes to Dominion Class Action. And again, that really has nothing to do with the law office of Gary Fielder. Doesn't have anything to do with Ernie Walker. So I encourage you to go to dominionclassaction.com. Now, of course, Dominion Class Action is about O'Rourke v. Dominion Voting Systems, Inc. et al. But we're building, and I say we, but the team is building SOS. We're building Save Our Suffrage. And that will include all kinds of different content from different facets of the election integrity movement. And in that regard, Save Our Suffrage, SOS, saveoursuffrage.vote, we'll be building that out, and that should be done in a week or two. And again, I say I don't really have anything to do with it. I've got a busy small practice and big jury trial next week, just had a jury trial last week. So it's all I can do just to keep up with the legal work. But obviously I'm interacting with the other members of the team who are working on their other roles as a part of all of this. There's a recall effort here in Colorado, trying to recall our Secretary of State, Jenna Griswold, and the Governor, Jared Polis. That'll be part of Save Our Suffrage. Obviously, we'll include videos of other individuals. This, I'm being informed, is my first podcast. I thought we were just going to do another video for the website, but I think we're going to be starting a podcast, and that's exciting because, as you can tell, I can talk for a long time without taking a breath, and I think that's going to include some demonstrative exhibits, more sort of a trial lawyer look where we have slides or video clips or other graphs or other things that I use to make my points in court. We're going to be incorporating those into the podcast. Of course, I'd love to have some guests on and ask some questions and really turn it up, because although we've been really shying away from using social media to its fullest extent, it's only because we've just been so overwhelmingly embarrassed and just humiliated by being called frivolous and being sanctioned by the court. I mean, how could we really come out and say, well, listen to what we have to say when we've just been so, just talk about being defamed, all the mainstream media at every level, when the court just came out with the sanctions on November 22nd. The Washington Post or whoever it was, the Atlantic or the Esquire, they came again with another flood of articles about how bad we were and how frivolous we are. So we've been having to put up with that for a long time. So now I just think at this point, I don't really have anything left to lose. I mean, they've basically destroyed my reputation. They've really defamed me personally, and it's going to take years and years to get over that. I go into court, I have people come up to me and say, "Are you all right, Gary?" And I go, "Yeah, I'm fine." "Oh, I read about you in the paper. Are you still practicing?" "Oh, are you still practicing?" "Yeah, I'm still practicing." Of course I'm still practicing. I've never lost my law license for 31 years now. So, no, I'm still practicing as hard as I can. So there's going to be some exciting developments in the podcast, and we're really going to start getting into these issues because I'm just sick of waiting for other outlets to address some of these constitutional issues. That's our bailiwick. That's where we're coming from. So whatever experts are doing what they're doing in terms of ballots or marking or phantom voters or the census of 2010 or, the images, or that's good. Keep doing that. We're going to be focusing on the people, the power they have, the state action of these other individuals, and the constitutional damage that they've done in violating really every registered voter's rights. They violated over 100 million people's rights. And using the case as a means to, in and of itself, clean up the voter rolls. Because if you are a prospective plaintiff, well, then you must be alive. So in the process of determining which prospective plaintiffs exist to get a card in the mail, we could use this case, we've been saying this from the beginning, as a means to help clean up the voter rolls so that anyone that doesn't really exist, anyone that has died, or anyone that is not a citizen of the United States is cleaned off their voter rolls. Because until we do that, we'll never have a legitimate voting system. Because as we've all learned, that's part of the mechanism of how these entities that are affecting our electoral process, that's one of the mechanisms they work through the phantom voter. So this is all part of it. The Constitution, our rights, not only as citizens, but as registered voters, and how they can be brought to bear in your state, all of you ought to be consulting with a lawyer to bring a class action in your state. If I wasn't called a frivolous lawyer, I would have already brought a class action on behalf of the registered voters in Colorado for the down ballot issues. We've brought a class action with regard to the national election of 2020, the presidential election, but what about all the down ballot issues? Well, each state could file a class action lawsuit in their state court citing 1983, which is a federal statute, could be removed to federal court, but you could file the case in each state, even if your state voted a particular way. Well, if you really feel like the voting process doesn't reflect how the vote should have been counted, maybe some states are fine. I mean, I'm looking at South Dakota thinking, I don't think there's a class action there. They seem to have really have got it together. You could look at Florida and say, well, I'm not sure if they could file a class action there. I don't know. There was some voting anomalies, but they seem to have gotten it together. Texas the same way. They rejected Dominion. They seem to have gotten it together. But Colorado, Georgia, Michigan, these other states that have obviously had all of these voting irregularities, typically associated with more people voting than even live in the counties, over registration, things like that, they should contemplate filing their own class actions. But no lawyer is going to take the case as long as lawyers like me are being found frivolous for bringing cases in that regard. So the second half of the appeal is very important. I could sense losing the standing argument and still being not found frivolous. That's a critical element to this. I mean, you can win or lose an appeal, but that still doesn't mean we're frivolous. We were never frivolous. We only had good intentions. We worked through the whole case in good faith. We spent all of the money. I say we, there was a team of us deciding what bills to pay. We're tens of thousands of dollars in the hole, but we spent all of the money on reasonable business expenses, which did not include our gas or food or lodging or plane tickets or any money to the lawyers. It included paying the rent for the 3 offices that we took out, paying the paralegal teams that we used to verify all the information, paying the companies that were responsible for setting up these videos and editing them. I mean, they have to live. So that's how we spent the money. So we know that if the case is reinstated, that we can get this thing publicly funded, because for a while, everyone was really excited about the case, and the case was being adequately funded. If we were to be reinstated, then I'm sure the public funding would pick up, because we'd be out there stumping. We would be really encouraging. But it's hard for us to do that now because of this sanction and dismissal. But if you want to go to Dominion Class Action and you make a contribution, it's going to the nonprofit. It's going to Save Our Suffrage. It's being handled by a board of individuals, and that board is determining which bills to pay and how best to use the money. So we still take contributions, but they don't go to the law office, and we only spend the money on things that forward this movement, our class action, our thought process, our civil rights litigation, or other reasonable business expenses.
We're going to change that, though. We're going to start paying you.
Well, we're hopeful. In the end, that's we've figured out that that's the way to do it, is to set up a nonprofit. So we set that up back like April 30th, May 1, right in that area is when we finally got the signature, ironically, from Jenna Griswold, but she's the Secretary of State. We got the paperwork on that. So hang in there with us. We're really grateful to have everyone watch our videos. We always get 4,000 or 5,000 views. I think we get 2,000 views on YouTube. We hate being on YouTube. I don't want to be on YouTube. It's kind of like you're a sellout if you're on YouTube. But we put it on YouTube. We put it on Rumble. We put it on a couple of other sites. So people tend to enjoy our videos, and I just kind of ramble for 30 minutes. But I do kind of get my thoughts together before I come on. And we really appreciate all the help, and we really appreciate all the support. There's so much more work to do, and we're going to be continuing battling for you, and we're going to be continuing battling for our children and people who haven't even been born yet. Because again, if we let this continue, our nation's in great peril. And when you're talking about the United States of America, that's going to be a tall order to change this country in the fashion that the World Economic Forum, these other globalists want to change it into. So let's seek peaceful means. Let's seek civil remedies so that we can hold those responsible by a preponderance of the evidence, instead of constantly having this idea of needing some government official to go arrest somebody and charge them with a criminal case beyond a reasonable doubt. If that happens, so be it. But that's sort of a pipe dream, if you want to know the truth, because I don't think you're going to get any government people to do any of that. I can see it happening in Wisconsin and a sheriff here or there, but on a mass scale, I'd stay in the civil arena. I'd stay in the civil rights arena, preponderance of evidence. And instead of asking a federal court to tell sovereign states to send certain electors here or there in a presidential election, one of the reasons that we consented to the magistrate, I've said this a couple of times, is because we don't need the judge. We don't need the judge judging the evidence or casting dispersions on the lawyers or picking one side to determine the case before we even get going on discovery and then sanctioning the lawyers that the magistrate chose to rule against. No, we just need the magistrate to sit quietly off to the side and sign orders that we present after argument, whether that be for discovery or depositions or subpoenas or requests for production of documents, whatever the case may be. We're prosecuting the case. Mr. Walker and I are prosecuting the case. We're the prosecutors. Normally the prosecutor gets treated with some level of respect, but we've been treated like street urchins the whole time. But we're the prosecutors, and we have real clients that are behind us. We had 500 by April 25th. That number would easily be 5 to 50 million had we not been dismissed and the movement allowed to continue to grow. It would be easily 5 million to 50 million people, all of whom know that their rights have been damaged by these actors and others. So thank you very much. We'll be doing a podcast a week. That's our goal. A podcast a week. And in that, it won't just be me rambling for 30 minutes or so. We'll have some videos and we'll have some content and some guests, and we're really going to keep everybody updated. We're making a major commitment to get back online and really update everybody, because once these orders start coming out, again, they may not be in our favor. We're going to have to go to the next level. They might be in our favor, and another series of attacks will be coming against the lawyers or our clients. We'll just have to see how that goes. But we're sort of all in this together, at least the people that are vested in an honest system, and we're with it in this country, not to the exclusion of others and caring about other countries and seeing what they're going through, but with just the understanding, if we don't get our elections under control, well, we're going to be right there with them. Except I can't promise what's going to happen at that time, because we're a different animal, we're a different beast, we're a different citizenship. So keep hanging in there with us, and we're going to keep fighting for you and fighting for our children and our unborn children. Thank you very much. We'll be talking to you very soon. Thank you.
And it's there I'll stay and shall persist till the world sees this injustice. Power to the people I will lament. The bank should not run the government. Yeah, I better be prepared to stay there for a while.